Now, the keynote presentation will be presented by Dr. Fernando León-García. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the keynote speaker.
Shubo Shokal, Kamon Ashubai. Good morning and hello for those who didn't understand. So I hope this is not too profound and too dense for you, but my intention is to just give you a general perspective that will allow you to then zero in on several of the themes that are part of the AUAP conference. First of all, let me comment that what we need to do is check on what is working, take note of what has failed, and reflect profoundly and proceed with what needs to be improved, and seek to reinvent and innovate that which we must. It's also important to acknowledge that we are moving through different stages, and depending on what institution you happen to be linked to and what region of the world you are located, you are probably in one of these three stages. First is emergency, where we have all shuffled around and tried to pivot and adjust what was needed to provide continuity to the educational programs that we offer to our respective constituents. Second is that many of us have been able to move forward, and as there have been health protocols and innovations in medicine, we have been able to have a more stable environment. But there have been a few who were ready from the get-go and have not only tried to cope with what has been, but have tried to acknowledge, innovate, and invent what should be. Let me just share with you some thoughts arising out of one of the many surveys that was carried out. This was a survey that was carried out with university presidents, over 700 responses from over 80 countries. And I'll just point out a few things. Number one is that all university leaders, regardless of the country, regardless of the location, regardless of the nature, we need to acknowledge the role of faculty. If faculty had not adjusted to what was needed, we would not have been able to provide continuity to what was required. AUAP has as one of its key aspects internationalization. And in that sense, the survey led to identify some important and emerging aspects that are now part of the future on a go-forward basis. And that's that universities, because there were classes without students going to campuses, because there was exchange without physical mobility, now face an opportunity, which is e-mobility. And that's how to promote intercultural and international perspective without students actually moving. And then third, that the leadership identified that in the next 3 to 5 years, even if we were committed solely to face-to-face, we were likely and are likely to be already looking at how hybrid and online enrich the traditional student population as well as expand for other constituencies, which is arising out of a similar event that is being held right here. We had the IAUP triennial conference. IAUP has conferences typically every 3 years, but because of pandemic, it couldn't be held in 2020. We tried to hold it in 2021, and because of COVID protocols, we still could not have it face-to-face. So we had it online. And I'll just share with you several aspects that are key for university leaders as you all gather here to look at what the future bodes for us. At that event, we had over 400 from over 40 countries. We had over 80 speakers. And I'll point out several concepts which are key for leadership in higher education on a go-forward basis. Number one is mobility. We can ill afford to be the much criticized ivory tower that society has sometimes referred to in colleges and universities. And we need to be, just like in COVID, fast, quick, nimble, on our feet to make sure that the adjustments and responses of colleges and universities are there. We don't need another crisis for universities to demonstrate that we can move quickly. Number two, that although the survey suggested that everybody was mindful of the here and now, which is short term, that it is very important to have a long-term outlook. And accordingly, it is most important not to continue to reflect what COVID has done to us and what is working now, but what should be the next 3 to 5 years. And that is what we refer to as bifocal leadership. We also need to be mindful of the fact that business and industry requires short, accessible, laser-focused programs and offerings, that intercultural and international are fundamental, and that we learn from the Association of Indian Universities right next door, that there's an emerging concept called academic bank of credit that forces us to think of the learner not in the sense of a student being with us 4 years or 5 years, but that increasingly there will be students who will have gone to 3, 4, or 5 universities, and therefore universities need to be able to assess what students have learned and comprehend what they have mastered so that we can then pursue a degree. And of course, as we focus on learners, more individualized program. We of course also learned that while we were addressing the fate of students, we were not doing enough. And COVID only intensified what was student development, student mental health, student support. And that as universities, we need to, of course, be mindful of the masses, but we also need to be mindful of the talent that resides in whichever university, whichever society you happen to be with. And so what we refer to as Einsteins is everywhere. We just need to look for them, and we just need to implement the appropriate educational experience that will help nurture and develop this talent. Diversity and inclusion, not as something we have to do, but as a strength that will enrich what we offer to our society. And of course, there was a call before COVID for social responsibility, and COVID only intensifies the need for us to be linked better to community. And we also learned about empathy, solidarity, flexibility, and opportunity. And the survey also yielded that as we move forward, it's not about adjusting to survive. It's adjusting so that we can be faithful and consistent in delivering whatever mission statement we have with quality, with a mindset on operational and sustainable, financial sustainability, and of course, strategic. We can't be all things to all people. Next slide is simply intended to share with you how the mindset has been changing. So I'll refer to 2 slides. This was published by the Chronicle of Higher Education. And what this slide shows, rather than talking about each of the numbers, is that the degree of optimism is on the rise. Next slide will show some of the aspects that we need to key on. Next slide, please. Teaching and learning. It can't be the same as it was before. We need to increase public-private partnerships. There are several other things I've mentioned already. And of course, fundamental to this is student experience. Less than 2 weeks ago, I was at another conference in IAU in Dublin, another international organization of which several of you belong to. And they also had another survey. And here, all I want to point out is that even though the pandemic affected many of the things we did, there were many positive things as well. For example, one of the sections that IAU touched upon was research, and what the survey yielded was that there was enhanced transversal collaboration across institutions. This was without physical mobility. So you can imagine how much more is possible as we come back to face-to-face full force, but we don't forget the virtues of hybrid and online. There have been several leaders, of course, throughout this. I am sure that within AUAP you have your own, but 2 that are referred to extensively in the US setting are Southern New Hampshire University. This is a university that had 3,000 students Right now it has 180,000 students. We visited Paul LeBlanc, their leader, and I think what these two charts point out are where we are. Many of our universities are there on the side that is called or labeled challenges. But the right-hand side talks about opportunities and about the things that I just mentioned and others. Among those, trying to move towards programs that are more aligned to jobs, that are more relevant to desired skills, that are modular, that are granular enough to be able to help with acceleration as needed for the individual learner, that are stackable, and that are flexible enough to provide meaningful employment as such. Next slide. There are others, of course, who have pointed similar aspects. I'll just highlight two here. This is from Deloitte Touche and International Finance Corporation, the financing arm of the World Bank. And that's that we need to move towards a more learner-centric approach. We need to incorporate more online learning. And although, yes, we might be facing enrollment competition, it's about collaboration and about partnerships and about acknowledging the value of competency-based education. Next. We were also involved in a recent event in Colombia. And there, I'll share with you what the other thought leader in terms of innovation has shared with us. Next slide, please. And that is Michael Crow in Arizona State University. And what he points out is that we are moving from what has been an approach by higher education institutions of incremental changes, of having a bureaucratic structure, of slow growth and exclusivity, to one where we are searching for and trying to deliver transformational outcomes, entrepreneurial models, leapfrogging solutions, not what's next 3 to 5 years from now. And of course, solutions at a scale. Next. Many of you know that UNESCO, that's the United Nations Arm for Education, holds a conference every 10 years. Of course, this was not possible, so it came after 12 years. And it happened in May in Barcelona. And I share with you, again, some of the aspects that came about as UNESCO and YESALC, the Latin American branch, talk about UNESCO 2030. And of course, key among all is that the right to higher education is something that we all need to be working on. Transdisciplinarity is fundamental. A holistic approach to what universities offer has to be essential. Lifelong learning has to be something that we promote among our students. They're not here, and they should not be here just for the 3 or 4 or 5 years. They should be here so that every alma mater can offer them opportunities to continue to improve as individuals and as professionals for greater contribution to society. And of course, it's important to talk about flexibility and diversity. Again, diversity as a strength and a greater focus on competencies. Just about a month ago, we happened to carry out a trip, Harvard, MIT, and Southern New Hampshire University. And I'll share with you some concepts that, among others, Harvard, the traditional slow-to-change university, talking about some of the same things that I have shared with you. There's a report, it's on the web, Harvard Future of Teaching and Learning, that talks about reimagining the classroom, enriching content, and expanding the community. And of course, fundamental of this is that they're calling for us to look beyond the classrooms, where we meet the learners where they are, rather than be limited by space or place. Therefore, blended learning experiences and flexible learning experiences are fundamental as we move forward. Next. Going back to UNESCO, there's some principles, of course, that you can draw from so that as an organization, AUAP, or as institutions, you might consider one or more of these suggested by UNESCO: inclusion, equity, and pluralism, academic freedom and participation, inquiry, critical thinking, and creativity, integrity and ethics, commitment to sustainability and social responsibility, and of course, fundamental, just like AUAP was founded to do, it's about quality, it's about excellence. And in trying to draw to a close, let me share with you 2 more slides. Next one. It is very important to acknowledge that the higher education institutions that we were no longer will be, and that we acknowledge that we are moving toward what is increasingly labeled as a global multiversity. Multiversity because we are increasingly going to be facing multiple learners, multiple modes of delivery, multidisciplinarity, multiple roles. And global because it matters that we achieve local relevance and global outreach. The term global came about in about 93, 94 as the North American Free Trade Agreement was emerging, and the Toronto Globe and Mail talked about the need to make sure that we did not try to interact as silos, but that we were trying to see synergies, in that case, among nations, in this case, in universities, among and across universities. Last slide to close. We are therefore moving towards the post-pandemic era. There might be other crises, there might be other COVID strands, but we are definitely moving under different circumstances. And as higher education institutions, we need to reflect and try to transform. Tom Friedman, many of you know him, New York Times. I take 2 concepts that he has shared with us during COVID. The first is that during the pandemic, people have communicated, collaborated, and competed in more places, in more ways, and with more people across more countries than ever before. That's a plus, I would say. And second also, that now and in the future, because of the speed of change, we will always need to be in a state of beta. Beta meaning continuously testing what else will work under that challenge that we all have to achieve our respective institutional missions. So in closing, I would just say, let's take note and let's learn from this. Thank you, gracias, and appreciate your attention.